Hello and welcome to episode 37 of Pixel Sift. My name is Gianni and today, as always, I'm joined by Mitch and Scott.
Hey.
Hey.
And actually today we were joined by a different Scott because we are 48 hours away from the Australian federal election. So we thought it'd be a good idea to have a chat to the West Australian Senator Scott Ludlam from the Greens. And they've just announced a new policy to support the Australian gaming industry.
Yeah, we're also talking conflict in video games. Why is it that violence and confrontation is often the solution instead of, extending the olive branch?
We'll also be taking a look at Twitch's new donation method, Bits. Questions about how this will support those making their living off streaming games and how it compares to the alternatives.
That's the lineup for today's episode, which is episode 37 of Pixel Sift. Let's jump into it, shall we?
Yeah, so video games are systems that require the players to solve problems, and more often than not, that problem is usually in the form of taking down an enemy or like an opposing force. So, why do so many of the games we play use combat as the main mechanism for doing so? Why do gamers more likely to pull the trigger than, let's say, negotiate with an enemy?
We saw a really interesting contrast at the last a week ago or two, the E3 conference, where it was just after the horrific shooting in Orlando, and during the same time there was a bunch of video game developers and they were presenting their new games which involved a lot of shooting and a lot of violence. It's an interesting sort of quandary. Obviously, there are lots of other games out there that are using different methods of solving the game, solving problems and getting to the end of their story, plenty of other examples like that. But most of the AAA titles that we tend to come across are games that are, mostly shooters.
Yeah, combat orientated.
Yeah, a lot of the big ones especially. It's quite easy to... we speak about them a lot, really.
I guess combat and conflict is one of the historically, biggest things in human history.
Well, I think you'd like to be able to do things in video games that you can't do in everyday life. Living, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't ride a dragon in real life, so there's a bit of an escapism element to it.
Escapism, perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think mainly... in regards to it might have been initially the form of like AIs not being really that, I guess, complex. So you need to, it's either, okay, on or off. All right, so they're either attacking the player or they are with the player. So you can't really, a negotiation is a two-way thing, which requires the AI to give something back to the player that's not necessarily bullets, I guess.
Also, you run into like repetitive issues there where like you'd have to have so many different scenarios. Otherwise, you'd be running into the same kind of dialogue all the time, which, obviously people don't like.
I mean, there are some notable examples of situations where games can be quite high profile, but not including combat. I guess one that's kind of sort of blurred the line between that was the original Mirror's Edge game that came out, where there was shooting in it, but the primary thing of that was actually escaping and not getting involved in fighting and combat. And that was originally made by the developer DICE, who are most famous for the Battlefield series. It was one of the first games they launched with the Frostbite engine, which was their major Battlefield.
Look, there are a lot of new games that are kind of pushing towards that more art house style cinematic games. Firewatch was one where it's not really about conflict at all, even a completely different one, but Adrift was another one where really there's no conflict there. It's just kind of an exploring type game.
A game like Journey, for example.
Perfect.
Where you just are on a journey and experiencing, and there is, it's a very simplistic, stylized sort of game, but there is a storytelling that's involved with that, and you can tell what's going on with the way that the game is actually being played, and there isn't a combat element to it. All you can do really is when you come across other players is kind of make a little beep sound at them, basically make little beeps and things like that. So.
One of my favorite games ever is the Valiant Hearts. And in that game, you play as a couple of different soldiers, and I don't think I remembered a notable instance of my character ever actually killing someone. I think the closest I came to it was it's implied that you fire an artillery piece at another artillery piece and take it down, and I guess there's implied death in that, but I don't think, and I think you do see a lot of on-screen death, but none of it none of it really happens as a result of your own character's actions. Your character's kind of trying to negotiate World War I just surviving it pretty much.
It's not incentivized, and there's obviously other games as well, like the one This War of Mine, which takes place with characters who are kind of in a war zone, and the war's kind of happening around them, and there is sort of no incentive there. But of course, that's sort of more of a smaller indie title, and I think this is one of the things where obviously market forces obviously dictate the way that certain games are going to be made, and these big companies have investors, and investors want a sure bet. You know, they want something that they know is going to be pretty well received. Everyone kind of knows the same thing. There is this argument that always gets talked about where people are basically having the same doll, different hat sort of thing, because that's what they know sells. And this is the reason why we see some of this risk-averse sort of behaviour where we don't see different sorts of characters. It's always the grizzled, stubbly man who's the main character, rather than other different types of people in there, when obviously the world is far more diverse than that sort of experience.
Well, these stories are about some kind of conflict, some kind of resolution, usually brought about by you. And combat's a very easy thing to kind of base around.
To gamify.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really have a huge problem, I guess, with that. It's because, like we said, gamers are about a little bit about escapism, a little bit about immersion, a little bit about doing things that you can't do in real life. What I'd really like to see is a little more realism going into how these enemies and AI players basically, approach conflict. Like you said before, a little bit of dialogue, so it's not straight to, getting gunned down like in GTA 5. There can be some kind of middle ground there. And, it's doable. It's just people need to take this kind of idea in a different direction.
One of the examples that was given was the Deus Ex sequel that came out, Human Revolution, and at one point you've got to sneak through a police station where you previously worked, and then all of the people immediately attack you, and no one says, "Hey, Adam,
what are you doing?
Adam, what are you doing here?
Get out of
You're
here.
not supposed to be here. I thought you were dead," or something like that. That's just the immediate gameplay interaction, is that they are an enemy and they have to be killed.
And that's with most games these days. I mean, GTA's, all the GTAs, even Skyrim, I thought was a bit poor in that kind of area. One game that we mentioned before the show that did it quite well was Mafia 2, and I have high hopes for Mafia 3 as well, because it was a little bit just more realistic in the way that the police dealt with you as a criminal, especially a low-level criminal. Whoever's played it will agree. I won't go through it all because it's a long and big game.
Yeah, and the new Mafia as well, brand new one.
I haven't looked into it too much.
Well,
but
there's particular areas
picked up where they left off.
Well, there's areas because you are playing an African American man, and there's areas that you can't go into because you automatically get a huge amount of police presence, and there's all of this sort of stuff about the racially charged eras.
That's it,
and
realism. I want that. That's great. That's
and
perfect.
having a consequence about what actually happens in these games. And yes, there are obviously targets to shoot down, but when you're trying to tell emotive human stories, you can't just have it the black and white sort
of stories. If movies were to behave like this and have characters act in the way that they do act in games, they'd be laughed off the stage, so to speak.
I think it's a challenge for developers to come up with these engaging stories without conflict and not come across like a choose your own adventure novel almost.
Yeah.
So it's just choose this and then this will happen, and if you choose this will happen. But with combat, it really allows the player to really take control of their own situation in the sense that they're not just choosing an option to get a result. They are actually affecting the exact, I guess, circumstances of how they bring down the enemy. But
there's plenty of choices that everyone makes in everyday life. So,
that's true.
There's lots of stories that can be told from, differing perspectives where people have different things. So, it's one of these things that will, I guess, as the industry develops, we'll see more of different types of games, and we can get a different sort of diversity of people in there. So, yeah, let's jump into our next topic right now.
Let's do it.
Pixel Civ!
It's not Pixel Civ, it's Pixel Sift.
Pixel Civ!
Taking time off the campaign trail, I was able to just very shortly ago speak to West Australian Green Senator Scott Ludlam, and they have just announced a new policy in which to expand and improve the way that games are supported in Australia and make it more viable for people to make it a job. We chatted to him not that long ago. Senator Scott Ludlam, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
You're welcome.
Now, the Greens have just announced a new policy to sort of improve the viability of the Australian gaming industry. Could you break it down for the listeners so they know what they are looking at coming up this Saturday?
Yeah, very happy to. It is a new policy for us, but I guess anybody who's been watching the industry closely in any capacity for the last couple of years will hopefully find elements of it deeply familiar. So we've taken a couple of different approaches, there's a few different limbs to it, but principally the Australian gaming sector was smashed by the high Australian dollar during the height of the mining boom. Then it got hit by the global financial crisis. And then one thing Simon Crean did when he was Arts Minister, which was very good, was introduced a $20 million games industry development fund, like a rolling fund. They weren't given handouts, they were expecting to get the money back, and it got a lot of good studios and developers on their feet. And then George Brandis ripped that out from under them about halfway through the funding round. So the industry's had a pretty rough time. It's restructured greatly. So what we're proposing is to not unscramble the egg so much, but work with what we've got, which is a small but incredibly vibrant and creative gaming sector. So we want to extend the producer tax offset, which at the moment would apply to a film and TV production, but not to digital work, not to a game. That's worth about $133 million over the next 4 years, as estimated by the Parliamentary Budget Office. The second thing is to put back that fund that George Brandis tore up, which amounts basically to $20 million over 4 years. The third thing is seed funding for co-working spaces like the Arcade in Melbourne, if anybody's spent any time in there. It kind of gives developers or people in any area of the industry a bit of an end-to-end look at all the different kinds of skills and expertise that go into not just coming up with a game or making it, but distributing it and promoting it. And so we think those kind of co-working spaces should exist in the major capitals. We propose to tie all of those funding mechanisms to improve diversity strategies in the industry. When we had the peak bodies and the advocates front the Senate inquiry earlier this year, they were very upfront and explicit about the fact that while gaming audiences are really diverse, the developer community really isn't. And there's strategies and there's ideas that we think Commonwealth funding should be tied to that. And then the final thing that we proposed is that we fix up the hideous debacle that Abbott and Turnbull have made of the National Broadband Network so that the underlying infrastructure is actually fit for purpose.
Now, you've been speaking to game developers across the country as part of that Senate inquiry, which finished up in April. Have they been sort of telling you a bit about how that cut has sort of impacted them? I know a lot of them received some money through that. Some of the most successful companies that we have in Australia have received some money as part of that policy before it was axed. Have they? What sort of things have they been telling you about improving it? You mentioned their diversity, of course, is one thing, but what are some of the other things that are little things that could help improve our games industry?
The funding issue was really the major one. So people expressed how different the market structure is now to how it was when a lot of the big studios just fled back overseas. And so we got this really... I think it's been incredibly painful, and a lot of people lost their jobs along the way, but the industry structure now is much more like a mosaic of smaller outfits, garage-type startups and a couple of other bigger studios who sort of managed to weather the storm, or these really interesting collectives like you get in the Arcade where people are kind of moving between different roles. So that we found kind of encouraging that you've got this pretty resilient core of people who are still trying to work in the industry, but graduates spilling onto the market every year who simply can't find work. And that's really why I think the priorities that came through from people like Tony Reid and others who work really closely in the area was just some basic government investment, the way that you support an industry that you want to get on its feet so that it can repay its money back 100-fold. There's industry support out there for various other sectors. When you listen to the buzzwords that are coming out of Malcolm Turnbull's mouth every 15 minutes about agility and technology startups and disruption and telecommunications, you look at the game sector and think, mate, these are your people, but you cut the funding out from underneath them. So funding and kind of targeted industry support, I think, were the themes that came through the strongest. And also, I guess, the distinction, I guess, that people were making, that this is not just an industry. And the money side is important, obviously, and there's a big story there, but it's an emerging art form with really interesting cultural undercurrents. It's a new dimension of screen culture. It's about to go through another massive transition with VR and AR. And there's a really interesting cultural and artistic story there to tell, even if you're not interested in the dollars.
Has it been frustrating to see much of the debate about the national broadband network focusing on download speeds? I know you mentioned there that having hubs like the Arcade in Melbourne are very, very valuable, but of course that's a city-centric environment. Is it frustrating to hear them not talk about or not see the upload, which is very important to creators, being mentioned in the same sort of value?
I can't think of any element of the debate around the national broadband network at the moment that isn't deeply eye-gougingly frustrating. Like, the whole debate has just gone so sharply off the tracks. I think Tony Abbott told Malcolm Turnbull when he was opposition leader, go out and destroy the case or demolish the case, I think was the word he used for the NBN. And they did that really successfully, and they've inflicted this bloody mongrel hodgepodge of obsolete technology on us. And I was going to say we're stuck with it, but we're not, obviously. Maybe there'll be a change of government and we'll actually be able to bring some reason back into the debate. But they're rolling a network out that's going to be obsolete before it's even built, and that's terrifically frustrating. I do a fair bit of work in 3D modelling and rendering for some of the presentation work I do. I use a render farm in Germany, and you'll be sitting there for a really long time waiting for your stuff to, squeeze its way down a copper cable that might have been laid 60 years ago. And what I'm doing is nothing on the scale of what these studios are trying to put up into the air. So both from a production base, but also obviously for the users who want to get a hold of this content, what's happened to the NBN's been a disaster.
And for game developers who aren't in the capital cities, that means that there's a problem with their representation in the Australian industry as a whole. We don't focus on arts as only being capital city based. There's artists all over the country, and they're not probably getting the opportunity to contribute in the same way without having to move from their homes.
Well, keep in mind the whole art sector has been absolutely smashed. Like, they've had a pretty horrible 18 months with George Brandis, there he is again, raid on the Australia Council and this incredible rip-off into their little pet project fund. The fact that the new fund that they set up explicitly restricted Commonwealth funding going into digital gaming projects. So it's just not considered art. But when they took away the industry fund, they're basically telling us it's not considered industry either. So,
do you think it's a generational problem?
Yeah, I think it's part of it. I try not to oversimplify it, right? Because there are a lot of gamers who are not in the kind of young white demographic that I think many people consider is the case. There's a lot of older people, playing games on tablets and that kind of stuff. But in terms of policy making, one of the nicest things that happened actually during the Senate inquiry that we did this year was seeing some of the older major party senators have the light bulbs go off over their heads. It was actually a really constructive set of hearings that we held where these folks are sitting there going, my God, we had no idea. We had no idea you could do this, that the applications were this wide. Some of these things aren't even really games. We're missing some more expressive language maybe for some of the things that are being built at the moment. And that's before you even start talking about VR. So the generational thing is there. I think it's risky to oversimplify, but I don't think you can deny that it's playing a part in the neglect that's happening at the moment.
I guess finally, the question I wanted to ask is, this Saturday is promising to be quite an interesting election, and with the half quota for the Senate as well, meaning that we may see some interesting results. We've had Senate changes, of course, as well, election changes in that. But have you been talking to any other parties? And because no party can pass policy on their own, it's all part of getting it through as a conversation and collaboration with other people. Have you been talking to some of the other groups about these sort of policies and what their positions would be?
Not really, not during the election campaign. We do that a lot when you're not in election campaign mode, obviously, because you're negotiating on bills and initiatives, working on committees and this kind of stuff, and that's when all that work gets done. Mm-hmm. During an election campaign, it's kind of deeply hypothetical when you don't even know which minor party senator is going to be in there, or whether it's going to be someone you've never heard of, and whether the government might cease to be the government, God forbid, in a couple of days' time. So it's difficult to do that kind of policy collaboration in an election campaign. We feel the most important thing is to say we've got a whole suite of ideas that covers everything from tackling climate change to abolishing nuclear weapons to shutting down the torture islands in the Pacific to, an industry support initiative like the one that we're talking about now, try and get all of those ideas out to people so that they hear it directly from us. And then it's basically up to everybody else. It's like, all right, Australia, you fill up the parliament with the people you want, and then we'll see what we can achieve once we're there.
Well, Senator Scott Ludlam, thank you very much for joining me today, talking a bit about the games industry. We'll wish you luck on Saturday, and hopefully we'll hear some more about the games policy in the next couple of weeks, or as this Parliament starts to settle. Yeah, much appreciated. Thanks. Thank you very much. Senator Scott Ludlam, they're up for election this Saturday with the Greens if you are in Western Australia. Let's jump into our next topic.
Visit us on pixelsift.com.au.
So, do you use Twitch? Well, we sure hope so, because we're broadcasting out on it live. Hello to our beautiful and faithful Twitch streamers. For those who don't know, Twitch is a bit like YouTube for gamers. Anyway, this week Twitch released a new donation system that incorporates bits as emotes through which to donate to streamers. One of the initial problems of this system is the sliding potential profits from these donations, as there is already an existing PayPal system for this. It's still in beta, but it's making pretty massive waves already. Well, as Twitchers, what do we think?
It's been a bit of a hodgepodge, I guess, because there was obviously no...
Just steal a line from S-Labs?
Yeah, hodgepodge is in my head for some reason.
It's good.
It's been basically a system where people have been designing things as they go along to sort of fulfill the needs of people who want to make game streaming their profession, something that they do for to entertain people and create content and all of these things. So the need arose, and basically people made things through PayPal, and they made other systems to donate to people, or they'll have things like buy off my Amazon wish list or something to that effect to kind of support their thing into the thing.
But it's interesting to stress that this is only for partners of Twitch.
That's right.
This is only for the select few that are very popular, and
that's right.
that you pretty much already have to pay to subscribe to these guys anyway. This is kind of on top of that.
It is. I guess there's always been sort of an argument for, a variety of different sort of rules that sort of apply for people who are partnered, and obviously they need to test them because they are the most popular people on the system that are currently broadcasting. It makes sense to follow, put all your new policies in place to support them because they're the people that support your company as well. Obviously there are other methods of doing this as well, but yeah, that's one of the big questions. I was actually chatting to Darcy Smith. He's from League of Geeks, the developers of Armello. We've spoken to them in previous episodes.
Hey, Armello.
But I asked him about this because they have a really big Twitch following. They've got a 3,000 followers they got this week on Twitch, and they have very regular weekly sort of updates. And I guess one of the big things was that he said that it was obviously a natural progression to put their own sort of spin on it, but he sort of had concerns about the percentage of the funds that the streamer would actually receive, and what actually happens when you put in one of these little cheer emotes, which basically put in cheer and a number on someone who isn't partnered or someone who is a low-level streamer who doesn't have this agreement. What happens to the money? Does Twitch just take the cash, or do they does it just not work if they're not a partnered streamer? There's not a lot of information there yet because it's in such a small pool of people, and people are always very
Could it be that it doesn't even work?
It could be, but we sort of don't really know until then. Yeah. So
sorry. No, you go on. Lost it.
Yeah. The other thing that Darcy mentioned was that there's an interesting sort of discussion about the way that the revenue share kind of works.
Yeah.
It's kind of all up in the air. No one really sort of knows exactly what it sort of sits at yet.
There is, I've got a little small little graph here that is supposed to explain it. This is based on basically bit cost of say $1.40.
Yep.
the caster share is $1 and the Twitch share is 40 cents. So the revenue share to the caster is about 71, or it's exactly 71.43%. If you take that all the way up to $308, then the caster still only gets 7%. But say if you were to do that with the current system, with the PayPal donation, $308, the revenue share to the caster would be 97% of that. So basically, this is a new system, very similar to what they could have done before with the PayPal, but Twitch are taking a far, far bigger share of it, especially as the money gets further up in the things.
One of the things that's really important about this sort of donation system is that this kind of puts it a level of protection in front of these larger streamers. There was a story that came out a couple of weeks ago where an Australian person had gone and donated $50,000 Australian to a bunch of Twitch streamers.
Using his parents' credit card.
Using his parents' credit card, just to kind of then for the whole purpose of people getting excited to get this sort of money coming through and then to do a chargeback on them.
Sure.
So they had the money ripped out of their account, because the way that chargebacks work with credit cards is that you have basically you're guilty until proven innocent effectively with these sort of things. So it's kind of to have a level of like protection, and Twitch is kind of taking a bit of the liability here because you're not actually able to charge back on that.
Yeah.
Well, if you do, you're charging it back on your Twitch account, which kind of has impacts on other stuff.
I guess the bigger cut is the streamer paying for the liability. Almost.
Yeah, I guess so.
And there are other
Some sort of
systems out there.
maybe.
Yeah, there are other systems out there which do have a bit of a buffer in there that make sure that people don't get inflicted with this. They say pay out every month or pay out like this to allow for these chargebacks to go through. They wait until it goes through, so there's a bit of steady income. But, if you're a smaller streamer, just been partnered and you want to get a bit of extra cash coming in, this may be something pretty tempting to do. And I imagine it's going to be something that's going to work in conjunction. People are going to have both. It'd be interesting to see if Twitch changes their policy to say that if you're going to take donations, it has to be through our particular system, which I think will be very unpopular. But one of the other criticisms that Darcy mentioned in this is that there's sort of a disconnection between what a bit is. Mm-hmm. You're spending your money on buying a thing, and then you assigning that value of that thing to a caster. And there's a problem with people who are in this situation who maybe have picked up their parents' credit card and they're like, I'll just buy 500 bits or whatever. And it doesn't really seem like real money, but giving someone a donation of like $5 or something feels like a real value.
I like to make the comparison between bits and chips at a casino.
Yeah, exactly. And we see a lot of this with that's right. You're changing your real money for a value, but I mean, you can't cash
Disney
out.
money.
Yeah, you can't cash out. Space bucks.
Yeah.
Spacely Sprocket Space bucks. So it's obviously there's a move here that they're trying to support the people who are creating the content for their website. But there needs to be this balance between having something that can be supporting people, but also making it worthwhile.
I mean, starting off similar to the PayPal tipping style is great, but not having the same incremental increases in revenue for the caster is a bit problematic, and people aren't going to like it. You've made an interesting point. I just remembered what I was trying to say before.
Nice.
When you said it is only for members of Twitch at the moment, I'd say that's during beta kind of thing. I feel like they would want to implement this across the board to increase their chance of making money.
That's exactly right. Yeah. If it's one of these things that benefits Twitch for them to have popular casters, so it makes sense to benefit the people who are making the content.
Twitch has said in a couple of articles and a number of different posts backing themselves up, they said this is subject to change.
Yeah.
Like it's beta.
I imagine this will change hugely because there's already been a massive amount of outcry, and they will take feedback, I think, really well, because it's Twitch.
That's right. Well, look, that's all we've got time for today. So we've reached the end of our show. Thank you to Green Senator Scott Ludlam for joining us, talking a little bit about the Greens policy for this upcoming election. If you want to find out more of our stuff, it's on our website. It's www.pixelsift.com.au. Scott, on the social medias?
People, you can find us at facebook.com/pixelsift, twitter.com/pixelsift, twitch.tv/pixelsift, and youtube.com/pixelsiftu.
Mitch, older episodes.
Yeah, you can go to our website to stream the episodes or subscribe to our podcast on either iTunes, Pocket Casts, or using the RSS link on our page. And give
us a rating and review and share it with your friends. We'd really appreciate it if you could share this out. If there's anyone interested in games policy, it might be worth checking out.
Don't forget to vote.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Please vote.